The Institute of Leadership and Management recognises great leadership as being multidimensional. We identify 5 dimensions: authenticity, vision, achievement, ownership and collaboration. We've broken down those 5 dimensions into 49 components, which enable us to organise our resources in such a way as to help individuals access the leadership development that is immediately relevant to them. This video introduces aligning values, part of the dimension of authenticity.
So we're talking about, as I said, the character to a large extent of the leader. Because an authentic leader not only understands his or her values, but will also know how they fit, how they align with the organisation in which they're working. So I'll be looking at values from sort of 3 aspects today. I'll be looking at your own personal values, how you know them, looking at corporate values, because we talk about obviously organizations having values, and then bringing that together with some consideration of leading with purpose. What do we mean by purpose? So your personal values really do reflect what you think about the world. And so they're formed by all sorts of influences. Obviously, childhood is very important. What drives you, what motivates you, what gets you up in the morning, the needs that you have to be met, the things that you care about, and also the type of personality you have. And you could probably see, looking at those, how linked everything is. Because if you have a need to be very active, you're driven by action, that will be a facet of your personality. So you'll have values that are to do with things that you care about, things that you can influence. So whether you think something is good or bad, whether you even believe something to be true or not, is so much an indication of what your personal values are, how you understand and your beliefs about the world. So the sorts of things that we hear when people talk about values, personal values, are the words that we used in that poll there. But sometimes they're a bit longer. They're not single words. They're things that are really important to people, like making a difference or doing the right thing. And that's almost describing the sorts of behaviour. So it's not just an abstract idea. It's actually much more concrete than that. I want to make a difference. I want to leave a legacy. And knowing your values is such an important part of understanding not only how you run your whole life, but certainly when it comes to work, as to whether you were going to feel comfortable in the organisation that you are employed in, and whether there's going to be a sense of alignment, of resonance with what you believe is important and what the organisation does. Because values manifest themselves in so many different ways. I've talked there about behaviour, and that's actually what others see you do. And I think that's when we've done research in the past where there's a disconnect or a lack of alignment between how people behave. So if people say they think honesty is really important and then are dishonest, well, then the behaviour will always trump, won't it, what people say. Your attitudes is sort of whether you have negative or positive feelings towards not only other people, but also issues. The values, what's important, what matters to us. And then our beliefs, to a large extent, is what we hold to be true. Really, that is an important insight into what we think knowledge is and whether we trust information. So lots of organizations might develop or do develop frameworks to try and identify or articulate what they mean about all of these sorts of things and what they would look like in a leader or manager. But the idea of organizations having values is quite curious in lots of ways because, of course, building and plants and computers and desks don't have values. They are the people in the organizations that have the values, and it's how they articulate them within organizations that really then becomes the organizational values. And increasingly, we've seen in the 21st century that these are becoming more and more important. Many organizations will have value statements now that underpin how they communicate, their marketing strategy, their recruitment strategy, which 20 years ago they didn't have. And we partnered with Glassdoor for the research I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes. And they recognize that so many, especially younger people, want to know what the values of an organization are when they're looking to make decisions about who to apply for a job to. So they have real benefits in terms of attracting staff. And I think at the moment, what we're going to be really seeing is an acid test of whether the values that organizations say they have are actually being acted out in how they're behaving, particularly, of course, with regards to their employees and their customers. So I mentioned some research that we did last year. We were interested to know why people left their jobs or why they stayed indeed. And one of the reasons that people gave us for leaving their jobs was because they felt they weren't valued by their managers. And so we started really thinking about, well, what do they mean by that? And actually, how do you show people that you value them? And we created a booklet that's free to download with all the advice that we gathered from hundreds of managers and coaches and people we asked, well, how do you show people we value them? So please do have a look at that, because that's a great conversation piece, if nothing else. But that thinking about value then prompted us to undertake further research. So we wanted to know, well, what are these values that organizations talk about? Are they the same as the values that people talk about as having themselves? And who sets these values? And then finally, do people actually behave in a way that reflects the values that we see stenciled on walls or in elevators, or we even get, see them on mugs occasionally in various organizations? So respect there, absolutely the most popular value overall of all the people who responded when talking about their organization. Respect features. Now, to me, the interesting thing about respect is actually, if you look at what it means holding somebody in high regard and also taking care of their feelings, having respect for somebody's feelings. Well, if you're doing that, actually, do you really need to worry about diversity and inclusivity? Because shouldn't you be doing that? Are you not working well in a team because you're respecting your colleagues? So some of these values are sort of meta values and really encompass lots of other ones. But we were then particularly interested, of course, to see, well, were there differences in sectors? Did some sectors have values that were unique to them? And you can see there, not surprisingly, when we look at the private sector, the public sector, and the third sector, that respect, although it features in all of them, actually is only first in the public sector. Excellence, again, features in all of them, but most importantly there in the public sector. And then we see some new values creeping in there, particularly in the third sector, making a difference. So I think there was nothing really very unusual about this. We can explain and understand those differences by sector. So we had another look to see what the values at an industry sort of level were. And again, it's respect, which you'd expect. It was the most popular value. Trust, very important, more important in some industries than in other. And then we see new ones emerge, obviously safety there in engineering and manufacturing. So a lot of the values that are put on walls, as I say, underline brand strategies, are actually commercially driven to some extent as well. So we then wanted to explore what individuals thought their values were. What are the personal values, like we asked right at the beginning, that you're bringing to work with you every day? And you can see here that integrity, incredibly important, comes top of the list. Honesty, as we saw earlier. Doing the right thing is when we're explaining the value, aren't we, in a much more behavioural way. Making a difference, again, much more, that's the sort of something you do rather than something you just think about. Respect, important there, caring, and I think fairness. And Fairness is so important. I think anybody who has had children know it's one of the first things that they tend to talk about, and not normally that's fair. It's usually you hear that's not fair. It seems to be part of the human condition to expect fairness in the way that we're treated. So we looked then at the differences, to see if there were any between the values that males said they held as opposed to the females. And we did see groups of differences there. But where it came to alignment with the organisation, it seemed that there was a closer match between what the men in the sample thought were their personal values with the organisation compared to what the women in the sample thought compared to the organisation. Which actually, when you think about it, probably isn't at all surprising when we look then, well, who is setting these values in organisations? And in fact, very few, I mean, only about a third of people who completed the survey actually said that they were involved in any way with the setting of the values. The values are set in almost exclusively within organisations with no wider consultation with other stakeholders like customers, suppliers, and essentially they were being designed, developed by senior teams. So if you think about the fact that it was younger people are wanting to know about values when they're making those decisions to apply for jobs, they seem to be very much excluded, as you'd imagine, being lower down organisations, not part of those senior management teams, and the values are being decided at board and executive management level. So it's not surprising, as I say, that we have that skewed result towards what male values were being reported in organisations, because, of course, we know representation at senior level is still predominantly male. But people did tell us some interesting things. We do love the open responses that we get provided with. And there's quite a degree of scepticism, actually, about where these values come from. And a very good point here, you can't impose values on people. If you say to somebody the value of this organisation is honesty, it doesn't make people who work there necessarily honest. The education team leader here said that actually that it's just done as a sort of paper PR type of exercise. It's not about living the values. But here, the charity manager, and if you go back to the slide that showed the values that were the most popular in the third sector, you'll see here that actually this person was drawn to the organisation because of the values that they espoused. So values do actually really impact people at all levels, but it's that feeling of actually working for an organisation where what is important to you is also important to them, i.e. your colleagues, the people around you, that give you that sense of alignment, that real feeling that you belong in the organisation that you're working in. I've extracted a couple of big name presidents, chief execs here, who both talked about their values quite a lot when they were in post. Denise Morrison here saying the importance of ethical principles to her. And Paul Polman, I mentioned him last week when I was talking about somebody who challenges, the fact that he's recognising one of his personal values that manifested himself at his time at Unilever was the need for sustainability. Great quote here that links that idea of values to purpose. If we know what our values are, if we're working in an organisation that shares those values or resonate with us, then our lives have a purpose. We know why we're getting up. We know why we're going to work. We know what it is that we're trying to achieve on a daily basis. Because it's so important for our motivation ultimately. How can you be happy if your working day is spent working in an organisation that you think actually doesn't get you, and you certainly don't get it? They inform your relationships at work, so therefore where you work. And if there is a discord, that will actually can lead to stress and all sorts of feelings of dissatisfaction, shall we say, and that will, of course, impact how you lead the people around you.